Studies Institute. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's good to see so many here to welcome an old friend of Washington, Dr. Shafeeq Ghabra. Before we begin, though, I just want to mention the forms that you were given downstairs. Were you given surveys? Yes. You were given surveys to fill out. They're anonymous surveys for our Center for Turkish Studies, which is doing a research project on American elite perceptions of Turkey and Turkish politics. So if you could fill those out and leave them either on the registration table downstairs or with me or at the sound booth, that would be much appreciated. When Dr. Ghabra wrote to MEI a few months ago to say he'd be in town, we jumped at the opportunity. I thought he'd want to talk about Kuwait and political developments in Kuwait, especially given the recent election results. But no, he said he wanted to talk about Egypt and the transition in Egypt. And we so often hear the American perspective of what's happening in Egypt, and of course the Egyptian perspective, but rarely do we get to hear the Kuwaiti perspective. And the perspective of a Kuwaiti who's been calling for democratic reform in the Middle East for quite a long time, like Dr. Ghabra. So we jumped at the opportunity. As a professor of political science at Kuwait University, Dr. Ghabra is called upon to address not only Kuwaiti political affairs, but the transitions taking place in the Arab world, the peace process, and Islamic affairs. He comments on these issues for a wide variety of Arab dailies like Al-Ra'y Al-Am in Kuwait and Nahar in Lebanon. Are you still writing for them? As well as for many international news outlets. He was founding president of the American University of Kuwait in 2003, a very successful and important academic enterprise in the Gulf. He's also been a visiting professor at the College of William and Mary and a visiting scholar at George Mason University's Institute of Conflict Analysis and Resolution. He's the author of 7 books and many articles, and perhaps is best known for his book, Palestinians in Kuwait, The Family and the Politics of Survival. And for all of this, Dr. Ghabra has received Kuwait's highest award for scientific research in the humanities and social sciences from the Kuwait Foundation for the Advancement of Sciences. And let's not forget that he served as director of the Kuwait Information Office in Washington, D.C. Years ago. So we're going to hear some very interesting analysis of the developments in Egypt from Dr. Ghabra. It's a real honor and a pleasure to have him here. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ghabra.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to talk about issues related to the Arab Spring through the Egyptian experience and paradigm. Egypt is the most central to what is happening in the region. The core. All others are important, but Egypt will define and will determine the course of events for a long time to come. And in that context, I felt the importance to understand what has happened in Egypt. How did it happen? What are the dynamics? And what are the issues that are creating this particular transformation? So I will ask you to bear with me, probably. Some analysis, we're academics and we tend to be boring a little bit. And not like great journalists, and we met in 2002 when you were a journalist, and my predictions didn't come right, so I don't know, I forgot what were my predictions then. But let's talk about now. And what I'll try to do is put the Egyptian experience in context so we can understand what is going on today. Well, before the revolution, there was a popular fallacy that if the dictator goes, if Mubarak goes, and you can generalize, if any particular ruler goes, then radical Islamists will come with their extremist ideology and extremist behavior. This fallacy is suffering now from a major paradigm shift. because of the events of 2011 in Egypt and in the region. Political parties in Egypt, like many in the region, were window dressing and were not actual political parties. There were those in the underground, mostly the Islamists, but those who operated at a certain level, at an open level to some extent, were window dressing and had many limitations to their activities. There was a policy that by the regime, and I would say by many regimes in the region, but by the Egyptian regime, that Egyptians will never rebel. Egyptians will never revolt. That also was challenged. Some of us ask, where did they get this from? The history of Egyptians say they do rebel, and there has been many rebellions, and intifadas, and anger, and demonstrations, and expressions. But there was a policy there. They will never rebel, but they rebel. Most Egyptians happen to be apolitical throughout the 80s and 90s, apolitical, focused on day-to-day issues. But the circumstances and the regime of Mubarak skillfully turned them into a politicized population, not by using any particular skill, beside not allowing them to be what they need to be, and by forcing a particular style of dictatorship that made them more political. So these are just certain points to start what I want to speak about. Let me first talk about what I would consider the evils of unchecked power. The evils of unchecked power in Egypt. And I'll go through several aspects that make up this dimension. And this is blind power. And it has no ability to understand the impact of its behavior and the impact of its decisions on the people, on those who are affected by it. Well, government in Egypt, particularly under Mubarak, more and more tended to be accountable more and more to the president. And therefore, pleasing the president was the #1 priority. Whatever that may have meant, it had an impact on the population. The mindset of President Mubarak was more or less the way he rose to power. From the army to being a pilot, being chief of the Air Force, into then becoming the vice president, then becoming the president. I mean, the jumps. It was all, so the mindset was, I can get over basically anything. So that was there in the mindset. He made 2 strategic mistakes that have contributed to the Egyptian revolution. And my assumption, if the Tunisian revolution did not take place, the Egyptian revolution would have happened several months later, maybe a year later, but it would have happened. It was in process. 2 strategic mistakes in Egypt by Mubarak. A, appointing Habib al-Adili as the Minister of Interior, who was very authoritarian and turned much of the security into a far more authoritarian institution, and that has happened in 1977. And then pushing Jamal Mubarak, 1997, and then pushing Jamal Mubarak to become the member of the National Democratic Party Secretariat General, and then that's in 2000, and then 2002, head of policies in the NDP, the National Democratic Party, as a Secretariat General. So head of policies, and so pushing Jamal Mubarak into the structure of power of the leadership of Egypt. So 1997, Habib al-Adili and then Jamal Mubarak. Jamal and Adili became very toxic to the political system in Egypt. And Jamal's rise basically accompanied Mubarak's, the father, slow disengagement from many of the internal policies. He focused on foreign policy more up till a time when he went into more isolation after the death of his grandson in 2009. Jamal's thinking was always based on his upbringing, which is very much from the day he came all the way till the day he became in the leadership of the National Democratic Party, and those around him realized that he is the person to become president in the future. So there's a lot of building of expectations and false expectations as well. What happened under Jamal Mubarak more and more since 2001, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but in particular 2004 with the Nazif government, which stayed after the revolution, is a liberalization of the economy. And that liberalization of the economy was not your normal liberalization that you may get in any other place. It was not well regulated. There was a lot of corruption involved. It went from the right hand in the regime to the left hand in the regime to the cousins of the regime to those related to the regime. There was a lot of corruption. And there was no sensitivity to the common people and to their issues, aspirations, needs. One can say that Mubarak's inner circle was more sensitive to such issues at the social level. They had this traditional Nasserite, Nasser's orientation, which was sensitive to wages, workers, peasants. With Jamal's people, no sensitivity whatsoever. They came from the moon. They had no connection with the grassroots and with the people. So that added to the issue. One can see a lot of that happening. I mean, when you had the story of Mohammed Mansour, one of Jamal's choices as Minister of Communication, and the 2009 train crash and the scandal surrounding it also. Before that, the sinking of a boat in the Red Sea, more recently the fire in the Shurak, a lot of corruption that had also reflected itself even in the infrastructure of Egypt and of Cairo. Still, Egyptians thought, till very recent, that reform from above is a hope and is a possibility. And there was that hope that maybe Omar Suleiman, the head of the intelligence, could be the man to save the country. So they thought that is a possibility till recently, till 2008, maybe 2009, but he could not deliver, and there was a push in a different direction, which is the inheritance. Jamal Mubarak becoming potentially the president of Egypt. So to take this as an overall, let's look at the reaction. Here we see the seeds of rebellion. People getting angry from those policies. People getting annoyed. People getting frustrated. And that's how Kifaya was born in 2004. If you look at the Egyptian case, between 2004 and 2010, Kifaya was involved in 3,000 strikes and sit-ins. Kifaya's voice reflected the middle class and the aspirations and the frustrations that were going on. Between 2005 and 2008, 1.5 million Egyptians participated in protests on economic issues and on working rights, including labor. Workers had major protests in a place called Mahalla in 2006. So that was building. Labor strikes in 2008. Even with Mubarak's picture stepped on. That was new. And a new culture was emerging. And the Prime Minister came, spoke and to 20,000 workers and accepted their demands. But there was a new climate, new willingness to fight for a different world and to fight for rights. And so 6th of April were born out of the 2008 strikes by labor. 6th of April, which later on started on Facebook, then became a protest movement, and then are responsible for calling for the revolution on the day of the police when the revolution started in Egypt. So 6th of April evolved out of that, and one can look at the background. I mean, you have many in the 6th of April were coming from different backgrounds. Some were Muslim brothers who left the Muslim Brothers, opened up to other social groups, participated in social movements, became more open-minded in terms of looking at grassroots work and working with women, working with different groups, working with minorities, human rights. They evolve. So they have this background, and yet they're able. So if you look at the background, you see an evolution taking place in the mindset. So that leads to the confidence building and the regime blindness that evolved from all of that. One, we see that Egyptians till 2009, up till even early 2010, were not sure of the value of collective action. Yet they were looking around and seeing the Turkish model, not the Afghani model. They're seeing the Brazilian model, not the Afghani model, not the Sudanese model. In the past, Egyptians used to say, well, look, I mean, whatever it is, we're better than Syria, we're better than X, Y, and Z. Now they started to look and say, I mean, we can do better. Look at other examples. Zuwail and Baradi, Nobel Peace Prize winners, gave confidence to Egyptians that they can be much better than that, and that they can reconnect with even their past. Baradi's return to Egypt shook the waters and the politics. That made a change and brought about more confidence. Elections to the Egyptian parliament in 2010 was a big blow to the people of Egypt. They felt betrayed. They felt that the regime is actually preparing for the final decision of putting Jamal in power as vice president and looking at the people, marginalizing 99% for the National Democratic Party in the elections of 2010 for parliament. Totally corrupted elections took place in 2010. The security of Habib al-Adili decided to go more aggressive. Now it started to feel that the people are the enemy, not anymore the activists. They started to behave in a far more aggressive way with average citizens, with average people, in terms of all kinds of interrogation, in terms of... so that also added to the situation. The regime employed about 500 technically savvy individuals to monitor the reaction on Facebook. So, but the Facebook people will find out that they will discover them easily, because usually these 500 don't have any deep content. So it's only the beginning of an argument, and they praise the regime, they praise Mubarak, but beyond that they don't have much to say. So that takes us to the igniter. The igniter was the Khalid Said story, and I'm not going to go into any details. You know the story and how he was taken and tortured and murdered because he was an average person trying to put something on YouTube regarding police corruption, and that created this page on him, the Wa'il al-Name page, but it created protests in the streets and brought people to Tahrir and other places to stand, and so all of that, the church explosion on New Year's Eve created the feel that the security is involved in it. All of that opened the door. You had the Tunisian, that's where the revolution started. You have the Tunisian revolution comes up, and the Egyptians feel that they are ready. And they were ready. They had deliberations on Twitter, and the National Democratic Party had no clue. They thought maybe there would be 5,000 people. Some thought there would be more than that, but they had no clue. Even at the highest level in the communication department, which is in charge of all the communication of the National Democratic Party, they had a meeting on the eve of the revolution of 25 of January 2011. And on that eve, according to what I was able to get from that meeting, from people who were involved, they had no clue. They met and they said, maybe there'll be 5,000 tomorrow. Guys, we'll meet after tomorrow. Bye-bye, bye-bye. They all went and departed. So, and among them was the person in charge of much of this, bringing these hundreds of Facebook guys who were monitoring and going over. So they had no clue, simply, and but also the revolutionaries did not have much clue about making a revolution. They themselves announced. I mean, they did all their deliberations on Twitter. They tricked the police. They tricked the security. They were not monitoring Twitter very well. They were monitoring Facebook. Somebody advised them to monitor Facebook, and they monitored Facebook. They deliberated everything on Twitter and announced the revolution on the day of 25 of January 2011 on Facebook. So one of the persons that I know, he's a leading writer in Egypt. So I was talking with him, and he was telling me I went because it was a call for duty. I had no clue that, and I thought I'm going to see the same 200 people, 300 people I see every time. Like the same people who come to the lectures and the same people who come here to the meeting, come to the Middle East Institute and go. I mean, it's a certain, right, the faces. So he expected to see the same people. And so he goes and he really sees the same faces. Oh my God, this again. I mean, what are we going to face? So he goes around and then he's standing there, some slogans, you know, the army and the people and the police are all one, you know, we want... And suddenly he sees 10,000 come from here, 10,000 come from here, 20,000 come from here. He was shocked. So the revolutionaries were shocked. And the stories of what happened day by day in Egypt regarding what happened in the streets, the surprises, the ability of the police to arrest leaders immediately. I mean, they took many people immediately from 6th of April, from other, there were second and third and fourth level activists who were able to continue and to do what the slogans were very moderate in the beginning. The army, the people, the police are one. Live liberty, freedom, dignity. I mean, these simple. Nobody was talking about regime change or the end of the regime in the beginning. It took the police brutality and the beginning of shooting on demonstrators in other cities in the beginning. And several died. In Suez, for example, which ignited the revolution, which ignited the anger. It's like a soul, it's just spirit, it just cuts across people through so many places and cities and just brought somebody to stand up, down with Mubarak. We want to change the regime. So the slogans of changing the regime and down with Mubarak did not take place in the beginning. It took place towards the end of the day. Towards the end of the day. And that's how the repression was the only answer the state knew. But it was the kind of answer that ignited the revolution and the rebellion at every level. It was a revolution that had a spirit and had no leader. 2 million in Tahrir Square in a very amazingly organized, efficient way, something unlike what we know about the Arab world, or you know about the Arab world, or you think about the Arab world, was amazingly creative in that revolution, all over the cities. So what makes it a revolution more, or a democratic revolution, or a civil revolution, is the fact that it wasn't just a student rebellion, or a middle class rebellion, or a workers' rebellion. It was students and workers and different cities. It was the all kinds of people in all the cities of Egypt coming together to make it. So that, I mean, there was a day where there was strike all over the buses and the roads and the communication. I mean, that made it. That these major strikes, plus so it wasn't only Maidan al-Tahrir. It was all over the country. It was bigger than any regime can easily contain. So all classes, all workers, labor joined, and it was a complete circle. So that made the circle complete. Now you look at the behavior of the regime used force, but at the same time, Mubarak tried to salvage the situation. But with every speech, he was 1 or 2 steps behind. So the speech he would make today, he should have done like 3 days ago. And in these events, it is by the hour, things will change. And it's like a big tsunami, you cannot just wait. I mean, the wave will already, you're in the middle, you're way down in this wave. So you can't, you have to do it ahead of time. So his third speech was very powerful. His third speech on February 1st was the most deadly, dangerous. It divided the revolutionaries and the protesters and made, this speech came at the time when he appointed Omar Suleiman as vice president. And the Maidan protesters started to debate, should we stay, should we not? And it's amazing. The regime solved the debate. The camel attack. That's how it is. And basically, the camel attack happened from loyalists who wanted to claim victory. And they understood that the revolutionaries were divided. So they said, well, we'll attack, and we will come now to Mubarak much more stronger, and we will also have a say in the future. They didn't understand. That was a dying regime. That's not going to be salvaged. So the camel attack comes at a time most needed, and the revolutionaries unite, and it has become stronger, and there is no way out for Mubarak from that particular attack. The revolutionaries were able to stand in the Maidan. Now, there's a theory. It says that the army was trying to stop the revolution and put brakes, that it was okay to have a revolution that will end the Jamal Mubarak possibility, but let's stop it here. So in a way, the army with the revolution, but up to a certain point, not all the way, and let's stop it. So there's confusion here about the role of the army. And there is a lot of talk that the army, some had orders to allow the attack to take place, and some did not go along with these orders among the army officers. There is confusion on this, but yet it reflects the fear of the army of a full-fledged revolution and a total change of regime in Egypt. So Mubarak mismanaged every step of the road, and as I said, was always one step late, while Adli and Jamal were always involved and at the harsh end of facing up what was going on. So the team in the Mubarak regime was divided. There were those who were flexible, such as Omar Suleiman, and there were those who were hardliners, such as Jamal and Adli. Adli was always a hardliner in this context. In this revolution, 1,000 died, 1,000 were missing, still missing, and 12,000 were injured across Egypt. Now, a word on the Muslim Brothers. What happened? What was their role? Which will bring us also to where we are today. The Muslim Brothers had a role in the beginning. The youth of the Muslim Brothers were involved as individuals, not as a party decision. At the same time, there was talk that the Muslim Brothers made a deal with the military that they will not push for the disintegration of the army. So there were some negotiations going on. This revolution was not Islamic. This revolution was typically civil, men and women, old and young. Mostly youth started it, and youth brought it to the level it went. But the Muslim Brothers were able as youth and then as a group to participate in the revolution and help defend certain areas in the Maidan al-Tahrir, particularly during the camel attack, this famous camel attack. So they had a role, but they did not ignite it, it did not start with them, and it was not an Islamic revolution. It's amazing that during the revolution, that the regime wanted to negotiate with somebody on the other side. And this is fascinating when one looks at the way regimes behave in the Middle East, that most of the regimes have spent the last 20, 30 years just destroying the middle, destroying the moderates, destroying the independent political parties, destroying independent initiative, civil society, you name it. And now when there's a revolution, you want those people to come and negotiate. They can't deliver. They can't even move one person. So finally, Omar Suleiman looks, and he finds revolutionaries in Maidan al-Tahrir willing to sit with him. So they sit with him. And the negotiations is amazing. He asked them to stop it. They say, we cannot stop it. It's no leader. It's on its own. It has no head. It's not like the old days. Say, but we need to let Mubarak some time. It's the time to want to stop it and keep Mubarak symbolic. Omar Suleiman is the vice president. And so Omar Suleiman tells them, according to what the revolutionaries who met him told me, that, well, if you do not stop it, it goes on, we will all suffer from a military coup. So the revolutionaries, the guys would answer back, well, we've been under military rule since 1952. I mean, nothing changes, even when, so what? What is it? It's been like that for a long time. So that's interesting to understand in this very complex revolution. And Mubarak steps down on February 11th. Stage 1 ends, and then we go into stage 2. Lots of challenges coming out of an old authoritarian regime that still had important parts of it, important pieces of it still in power. So you look at those, so there are forces here, several forces that are interacting with each other in this context. The Muslim Brothers is a force, the Islamists is a force, the revolution itself, the persons, the individuals, the groups, the activists that made this revolution at the grassroots is a force, and you have the military council, the Supreme Military Council, the powerful military council at the top. Now, to put it together, we need to look at the following. First, let's look at the Muslim Brothers and what's going on with the Muslim Brothers. On the one hand, you have a political party that has been formed for about 80 years or so, never tasted power, never came to power, and has always been in the underground. Now, for the first time, it's in the open. That's very confusing. It's easier under Mubarak to be in opposition. Now you're in the open, and you have three generations. You have the older generation, you have the middle generation, and you have the youth of the Muslim Brothers. And their dynamics are very different. And even their thinking is different. So you have an open party, so does it do elections at some point? Does it consult its youth? And if it doesn't consult, how would they react after seeing what all the youth, including many of them, have done? So the Muslim Brothers, after the revolution, did suffer from splits, from resignation, and from loss of momentum. So they are the most organized force. Yes, they will come. Yes, they will be in the Majlis. Yes, they will get elected. But there are many questions about the durability of this ability without major changes, and there are many questions about others coming out with different orientation. You have the Muslim Brotherhood background. So there are many issues here on this. The Muslim Brothers, when they won, when the revolution won, when the revolution took place, said they will not control the assembly, but they are now in control. They said they will not control the constitutional assembly. They will put limit to their role, and they will involve everybody. They seem more into trying to have more control. They said they will not run for president. Now they're running for president. But it's all in the open. It's all on YouTube. It's all on all the statements are repeated. So all these contradictions come up, and people now think. And many of the youth in the Muslim Brothers do not expect to be in a Leninist party and a command structure. They're more open to, and that's the source of tension within the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's the source of tension that is making Muslim Brothers, some of them, leave and go elsewhere. And the moment they leave, they change. They start thinking differently, plus having the background and understanding of the background. So it's important to see that dynamic, as big as it is, as transformative as it is, that there are many pressures on the Muslim Brothers from outside, but also many pressures from within, plus the pressures of the circumstances themselves. On the other hand, the military tries to hold as much as it can, as much as it's able to hold in power, and to find a way to keep. It has a role, it has a stake in the economy, it has a stake in many factories, it has a stake in power, and so the dynamic now. You have an old regime that's on its way out, let's say an old elite that is on its way out, and you have a new elite, the revolutionaries, the young, the activists, the ones who did this revolution on their way in. It's a long process. And you have the Muslim Brothers somewhere in the middle. There's a piece of them in the revolution, and there's a piece of them in the regime, and there's a piece of them somewhere hanging alone in terms of trying to govern, to rule, to express what they've been denied from over 80 years. And it is this dynamic, plus the responsibilities of power, plus the responsibilities of economy, plus all that's going to shape the new Egypt. But what I see is the formation of a new elite, and even if there is a deal over the potential presidential candidate between the Muslim Brothers and the Military Council, it's a deal on the way out. It's on the way out. The regime is definitely on kind of lost its ability to continue. It's an elite that is fragmented. It even didn't produce a bureaucracy that can behave as a class or as a group. It's very fragmented, and what it can do is just find an exit maybe, or find a way out, or could be round two. It's very hard to see how this will play out, but it will play out for a formation of a new elite that will shape Egypt in stages within the coming years that we see. Maybe these 2 years will be the most difficult, but beyond that, I see that evolution take place. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very impassioned description of the triggers that led to this remarkable event, the revolution in Egypt. I hope you're also going to you're considering writing a book about this, what led up to it. But I'd like you to put on your political analysis hat. You did at the end a little bit. But let's get into that more, because I think that's what we'd all like to talk further about here in this audience. You talked about the Ikhwan at the end, the fact that they've reneged on many of their pledges. And I'm wondering how you read this. The latest pledge they've reneged on was to not run a presidential candidate. They now are. It looks as though they might be in a position to consolidate power by doing this. I gather in Egypt that their popularity is plummeting, they're losing credibility, a lot of people are very angry and frustrated with them. Do you think that the Ikhwan are we starting to see the first of a series of missteps in this sort of unique path that they're on? Or do you think that there's a logic to what they're doing, that if in fact one is in a position to consolidate and dominate and introduce one's program, one should do so, and that they would be short-sighted not to run a president and in this way consolidate their power?
What I can say here is that the Muslim Brothers feel they had an opportunity, and there is a candidate, Abu al-Futuh, who used to be a Muslim Brother leader, and once he decided to run for elections on his own, he was expelled from the Muslim Brothers. Abu al-Futuh is a kind of candidate that can take many votes from Muslim Brothers, because many of them still feel he is a Muslim Brother, but he can take all the votes, or many, many, many votes from civil society, activists, youth, people in the 6th of April, among others. So he can take votes from left, center, and he may end up being the consensus candidate. I feel that the Muslim Brothers felt the pressure. At the same time, it is not clear if there has been some understanding with the Military Council that had made them decide to come as a middle-of-the-way candidate. but this is not running well with many groups and with many forces, and among the Muslim brothers themselves. There are factions, there are groups, there are individuals who resigned and who constantly believe that the leadership in the Muslim Brothers is still behaving as an iron party, as a vanguard party that's going to come, shape society, shape the future, do this. And many of the youth today are out of this theory of Muslim Brothers or Ba'ath or all the parties that have a particular ideology about shaping everything and every aspect of social, political, cultural. They're out of this totalitarian mindset. And this is creating enormous debate within the Muslim Brothers themselves and on the edges around them in their environment.
We'll take questions if people could please identify themselves.
Welcome here.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you here. What kind of discussions were there within the Brotherhood over these two changes in policy? Were there negotiations within party, within the sides, within factions within the Brotherhood?
As far as I know, yes, there was negotiations among them. There were discussions between them. They have a Shura Council. They voted. It seems that the vote among them was very close. It wasn't an easy decisions to come to. So in many ways, one sees that the divisions are serious and the consultations do take place, but this does not mean that you have consulted with the youth, with the grassroots, with all the supporters, the thousands of supporters across Egypt. That is a missing link, and many of the changes will be also coming from that corner.
Dr. Ghabra, I'm Tom Lippman. I'm an academic scholar here. We worked together when you were in your previous incarnations. There have been 3 presidents since the revolution now. And while they all came out of military backgrounds, they had very different personalities and operate under very different economic and political circumstances. Yet it seems to me that what they had in common is that whatever they brought to the job in the beginning, by the end, after 10 years or whatever amount of time, they had all become essentially your run-of-the-mill, sort of like African strongmen. They were never going to yield power voluntarily, and even though Sadat used to talk about building the state of institutions, there has never been an institutional framework for exchanging one set leader or set of leaders for another. Assuming now a complete break with the past, does Egypt have the capability to build a self-perpetuating political system that will make transitions legitimate?
Egypt had a semi-democratic past during the monarchy of King Farouk. Institutions that worked with each other and against each other, elections, prime ministers that stood against the king, was a tradition in Egypt. There were movements, there were reform movements that goes back to the early 1920s in Egypt. So Egyptians can draw on this liberal old tradition. Yet Egypt as a country does have institutions. Many Egyptians would say today that Mubarak's reign was the worst in terms of not respecting these institutions. With Nasser, these institutions were in the evolution then from a different point of view, and with Sadat they were maintained, whether it is the courts or other state bureaucracy and institutions. With Mubarak, this was marginalized. It became more him and his approach and not the institutions. What Egyptians would do, I believe, is reconnect with the existing institutions. Try, there is a parliament. The question is how democratic. There is already, now they are going for a constitution that will define a lot for the future, and that's why this constitution needs to be inclusive and needs to have different points of views in its writing and must be able to appeal to different components, including to individuals in the Egyptian society. So it is building on that, but also building on a cultural change. And this is the difficulty of this defining moment. The culture of those who are below 30 is different than those who are, let's say, over 40. Let me say those in the 30s are in the middle. But those who are under 30 have a different mindset. And many of those who really made this revolution in their 20s wait till their brothers and sisters who were 16 and 18 and 19 who did not even experience repression or experience dictatorship mature. So you have a culture, and the divide, the difference between these two cultures is like East and West because of the exposure, because of the social media, because of this intensity of debates among people and youth, and this ability to see everything wherever you are, at your phone, through phone or through your particular laptop or so. So it created a level of awareness and a level of understanding that is different than that level of understanding among the older group. So that dynamic, even on gender issues, you have a big gender issue. Just recently, one of the groups that's related to the revolution said, females who are participating in the demonstrations, etc., must leave at 8 p.m. Now, why 8 p.m.? I don't know. At 8 p.m. It's 1 hour after, 2 hours after sunset. Maybe that could be a factor. 2 hours is not. But whatever. The females, the women reacted and took the initiative against it. So what you have now among the people of Egypt, and what you have among the people of the Arab world, and what you have among the youth of this region is the era of demand, and you push, and you ask and ask for what you want, and you just don't give up in terms of what you want. It's like for the first time, the people want. And that has been a slogan throughout these revolutions.
Is there a question in the back?
Thanks very much. John Anderson, independent analyst, and first to thank our speaker for what is an extremely enjoyable presentation. My question is on both the old Egypt and the new Egypt that you described, and one rather different than the past, particularly in terms of new formations that have arisen in civil society, new party formations, as well as the old, of course, and appear, reappear, etc. One of the things that analysts watching Egyptians, seeing Egypt watchers look at in days of old were the professional organizations, associations. I'm thinking of the syndicates, Niqabat, whether doctors, lawyers, of course, journalists, elections for all of these that were highly politicized, and of course, an official establishment, an NDP, and a regime that sought to control these as much as possible. They were perhaps never therefore fully civil society because to some extent, of course, they were always officialdom. At the same time, there was struggle for them and for their control, and the Quen and others, as we know, fight for them. My question is simply, what relevance do they have in the current political picture? Are they important to look at? Do we see some of the same struggles going on? Perhaps we don't have we don't have a Supreme Council that can control nominations. Perhaps we have attempts. Can you talk about any of them and what their importance is in the current day?
I mean, meaning here the particular professional associations?
Professional associations.
And not necessarily the old National Democratic Party, right?
Not necessarily,
yes.
Yeah.
Because the old National Democratic Party continues to find a way in different ways, and probably through the military council, through others. That's normal, and there is a struggle around that. Regarding the professional associations, I see that each one of them has gone through major changes of leadership already. whether these associations are part of government or independent, and you have a labor movement, you have a maturing process going on right now in most of these unions, and you get new ones being formed because the old rules did not allow. You have changes of leadership, you have new elections, you have individuals who are too much associated with the regime stepping down or forced to step down. It's a totally new brave world.
Question about
Alan Kowski, here on my own as a supporter of the Institute. I realize other countries in the area are restrained by rules of diplomacy, but do you get any sense of how other governments are changing their attitudes toward how to deal with what's going on in Egypt?
You see, Egypt is a country that most of the rest of the region, those who have not gone through revolution, would want to see stabilized, would want to see evolve at least in a way that can that does not make it collapse. But a more accurate approach to what you have asked is that we are in the middle of these revolutions. And that has created many different reactions. There are those in the region who support the Salafis, and the Salafi is a phenomenon. In fact, wherever the Muslim Brothers retreat, the Salafis will grab on it from the right. But they are not an Egyptian phenomenon. It is not a natural phenomenon in Egypt. Egypt will find its way in dealing with it. There are those who support the Muslim Brothers in Egypt. But Egypt is such a huge place, a huge country, an old civilization. It will produce and it will evolve its own aspiration, its own way. And that's how I read it. I read a new elite being formed. The question for the rest of the region, those who have had revolution, that's it. They are in the game. They are in the same process. But those who have not, the lesson from Egypt, if you don't want to have a revolution, you better start reform. If President Mubarak, if ex-President Mubarak did reform in 2000, he would have left a legacy in Egypt. But he promised and he didn't. If he started something in 97, he would have been in a different position today. So, not doing reform is at the core of the collapse that we are seeing. And this is telling many other regimes in the region that have not yet suffered from a revolution that better start a reform process and better start giving in to certain forces. And we've seen this from the King of Morocco. He tried at a certain level, he took a certain initiative. Others are still waiting. In Kuwait, we have a dynamic going on between different forces and groups, and people are seeking deeper democracy, more constitutional parliamentary democracy within the monarchies of the system, not change of regime, full-fledged reform of regime. So the lesson from a historical point of view or from a pragmatic point of view will end up being what the others can learn from the Egyptian experience. Now, on the other hand, I believe that the Egyptian activists would like to share their experience. And they are sharing their experience with everybody in the region. There is an enhanced level of activism. It's amazing that these activists across the Arab world do seek the expertise of those who created this new revolution in Egypt. So the Egyptians, being the numbers, being at the core of the Arab world, are also in a position to share their experiences with civil society. We're going to see an evolution of civil society in the region across more independent, more dynamic kind of independent civil society.
When are we going to see that starting to take place in the Gulf? We've seen the Gulf react to these openings in Egypt rather negatively, in Bahrain, in the UAE, and elsewhere. Maybe you could comment on Gulf and its reaction and its need to move forward.
Yes, the most clear expression of the Arab Spring in the Gulf is the Bahrain. In Bahrain, there was a genuine revolution. There was a genuine rebellion. its intention was not to change the regime. Maybe some of the slogans after brutality have had that expression, but the overwhelming expression of this rebellion was to reform the regime and to come back to the agreements they've had with the King of Bahrain regarding a constitution, regarding the assembly, regarding voting, and a prime minister that is popularly elected by the people through competition by political parties. This is at the core of it. So the leadership of Bahrain was divided over this issue. Then there was intervention and a strong attack on the revolutionaries. There was bloodshed. There was later on the Basyouni report. And what you see today in Bahrain is a constant tension. It will not settle until it finds a way of resolving the political standstill. So there is a political stalemate now over what the regime does, but also over what the opposition does, and there are many youth, and they could be more radicalized if there is no solution. So that is one expression. Now you look at the others. In Oman there were protests, but at the same time it seems that the monarch sought certain understandings and certain reforms. I'm not sure how far, but it seems that there is a working arrangement, at least for now, in Oman. In Kuwait, we've had a dynamic year. 2011 was a very tough year, and there was a movement to change the prime minister. For the first time ever in the history of Kuwait, you have a grassroots movement, also by youth and also by the young, also men and women, demanding the change of government and the change of the prime minister. This has never happened in any particular Gulf country at that level where it succeeded, and it ended with the Emir of Kuwait agreeing to the demand of changing the prime minister and changing the government, but also dissolving parliament and having new early elections, which resulted in the opposition gaining the majority seats in the new parliament. And what you have in Kuwait is a dynamic at the grassroots, independent of the political force. So the youth are way ahead of the political forces. So the political forces may have their priorities right. Maybe they won't. But the youth seems to have their priorities and want to push. They're a big lobbying group. They're increasing at the level of civil society in pushing for political parties becoming legal in Kuwait. Pushing for changes in the districts of elections from 5 to 1. Pushing for reform in the judiciary. Pushing for the independence of the judiciary. Pushing for more and more, probably with the aim down the road of a constitutional parliamentary monarchy where you have competition between political parties and the government that is elected by the people and the prime minister chosen by the people, yet at the same time does not undermine that you have an emir and you have a crown prince and you have a division of labor that can be understood and agreed upon over a particular historical transformation. That's where it's going. Now, Saudi Arabia is a big question mark, and maybe to many of you is a big question mark. However, all I can say is that it is in a different historical stage than all the others. So it's in a different historical stage. The stage I see Saudi Arabia in is that its people, its society, is among the most vibrant now, trying to understand and to come to grips what is going on in the Arab world. They are the #1 observers and learners from what is happening. How will they reflect it? How will they express it? Is to be seen. But I do see that there will be activists born, and there will be expressions among men and women who would want to bring about the expression of their voices into the political system. So you see, it's like something evolutionary is taking place, but it will take time before you see full expression. You'll see something here, something there, but it will take time. But they are observing, they are learning, they are thinking, and they are taking their steps as activists in terms of what they want and how they want to express it.
Well, certainly the Middle East has been changed irreparably. Did you have a final question?
Hi, my name's Athena Hoover from the Jerusalem Fund. I just was wondering for your comments on why the enhanced activism that's been going throughout the Arab world hasn't really seemed to take effect on Palestinians.
The Palestine issue is the most complex of the situation in the region. As you probably know, Palestinians, when you look at 1987, 1988, their rebellion looked like the Arab Spring of today in terms of its methods and expression and even peaceful protest. They've gone through a lot. 87, before that the wars, after that another intifada, the peace process, the failures. I think the Palestinian society is evolving its own activism. And I believe they are developing that. And you see it in piecemeal. You see it around the whole, the gates, right? The wall that has been between the West Bank and other areas in Israel. You see it in different villages. You see there is activism evolving, even in boycott. So Palestinians are being impacted, but I believe Palestinians today, just to take it out of the rest of the region, have a different mindset now compared to the rest of the region, and their mindset today is to find the way. They are looking for a way. They are trying to experiment and discover a way. You see it in their novels, you see it in writings, you see it in artistic expression. There is a sense of too many losses. You already have 500,000 settlers today between Jerusalem and the West Bank. How would this be solved and addressed in a settlement? Is it going to end up one state, two binational state? Or is it going to end up still a Palestinian state side by side to an Israeli state? Palestinians are thinking, are observing, are doing activism, are fighting for their land, are there to stay, will not go away, their issue will not go away, but how they express it is something to be seen and may come at a certain time when they feel that it is the time for them to express their existence, their belief, and their stand for their land and for their rights.
Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Ghabra, for your insights into Egypt and the impact of